Well, Lonmin shareholders reeling at the news that the platinum producer has had a heavily discounted rights offer. Many are waiting the 19th of November to see whether or not the 106-year-old epic that once tried to buy the London department store Harrods and became synonymous with the tragic events at Marikana will survive to dig another day or disappear into the Bushveld sunset. This is The Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight, I speak to Hanré Rousseau, Portfolio Manager at Investec Asset Management, which is one of Lonmin's major shareholders, about the value destruction of the company and which way it is likely to vote. Let's work towards a crescendo, Hanré Rousseau. But first, at a penny a share, Ben Magara, Chief Executive of Lonmin, isn't giving investors much choice but to follow their rights.
No, Bruce, it's so deeply discounted. I think any shareholder would have to follow. Just perhaps a correction: we were a 5% shareholder at one stage of Lonmin. We've certainly over the last 2 months sold down, and at the moment a pretty insignificant shareholder, but still closely following the share, of course.
Okay, so you have sold down your holdings very dramatically in recent months then. Is it something, however, if you were still invested, that you would be terribly enamored with to see the massive discount? What, 94% of the ruling price at the time it was announced?
I think in the end, for me, the discount is pretty much maths in terms of underwriting the rights issue. But the issue is that any shareholder that looks at the investment today, whether it's 9 or 10p in UK, and you've got the ability to buy 46 shares at 1p for each you own today, the theoretical ex-right price is going to be just over a p. So kind of, would you really want to buy a share at a p if the price is going to be around a p afterwards anyway? And I think that's going to be the issue, that as the share price falls, that this rights issue could be potentially under threat even.
Yeah, and it is a very significant rights issue. It feels like a desperate last roll of the dice. 2009, they raised capital. 2012, they got, was it 11 billion rand from their shareholders? And this time round, they're asking for 6 billion rand for their shareholders. The question I've put to Ben Magara himself: is this throwing good money after bad? And he dodges the question. Let me put it to you. Is it throwing good money after bad?
I'm afraid it could be. It's slightly different to the Olympic Games, that we see it every 3 years, not every 4 years. And if I look at just the burn rate of Lonmin, we could actually see another rights issue in less than 3 years. And I think that's really what we saw in the share price yesterday. The share price was up 10% when they announced the rights issue. I think there was a sense of relief from shareholders, saying that at least now the financing's available. They'll be able to refinance the debt. There's going to be an equity injection. But when the results came out around midday and an update through the publishing of the prospectus, there was a recognition that it might not be enough. And we've seen only in October. So the year end was reported up till end of September, but they've actually given us a bit of an insight into what happened the last month. So within the last month, they've burnt another $100 million of cash. So they're raising 407, but just in the last month they've burnt another 100, and there are some reasons for that, but still that doesn't fill investors with confidence.
Mining is a notoriously expensive long-term game. Ben Magara makes the point that the platinum is in the ground. These are good assets in terms of the reserves that are there, but as long as it stays in the ground and can't be brought to the ground profitably, then it's a mug's game. Is it time to mothball Lonmin and wait for better days?
It's probably safer within the ground, I'd add even. But I think that's the reality of it. We've seen on the demand side significant drop off in demand for platinum as an auto catalyst, for demand as platinum as in jewelry. So the demand side has certainly taken a big hit. And there's just been no response on the supply side. We've seen Amplats continuing to grow. We've seen Impala now also raising equity to support their growth projects. Aubrey Platts have put on a mothball their project. But on average, the industry has been growing supply in a world that's not needing more platinum. And I think that's what the platinum price even showed yesterday, that the market's willingness or seeming willingness to give more money to Lonmin, throwing more money after bad, has put the platinum price under pressure, and it's been detrimental to the whole industry.
It most certainly has, and there's a strong school of thought which suggests that it is high time to take supply out of the market, and that means that Lonmin must go. However, it's massively politically sensitive, of course. We saw post-Marikana how the mining companies were talking about rationalising workforces and were really pushing back hard against wage demands from mine workers. Is it politically possible to let Lonmin go to the wall, or do we call in the cavalry in the form of the Public Investment Corporation, perhaps, to bail this monster out?
We've already seen a bit of that. So the PRC, which is around a 7% shareholder, has underwritten up to 25% of this equity raise. And one has to question whether that's the right investment. Maybe on a longer term basis, they see some value. But certainly from our perspective, where we are investing pension money, one has to say, listen, the capital that you're investing for pensioners, is that the right place for capital to be invested? And I think it's a general question in the market is, would $400 million not be better spent creating jobs somewhere else? And I think that's perhaps the failings of the market, where investors that are in too deep, and it's that classic adage of once you're in a hole, stop digging. But we've seen a lot of instances where people are in a hole and they just keep digging, and capital is appropriated and misappropriated and not spent at the right place.
Well, 36,000 jobs are at stake, and that's the government's real problem here. And we saw the last time anybody suggested getting rid of mine workers, there was a 5-month strike in the platinum sector. AMCU has gone very quiet through this process. We haven't heard very much from them. The economics of mining perhaps don't make sense, but the politics of mining make less sense from a capitalist perspective. Should Lonmin be allowed to go to the wall? That's 36,000 fewer jobs in the economy, and that's not politically palatable.
No, I agree, and certainly we've seen now the 3-year wage agreement that was struck around the time of Marikana is coming to an end in June, July. So we're up for another round of negotiations in the platinum sector. So politically very sensitive. We've seen COSATU under threat. We've seen NUMSA pull out of COSATU. We've seen the EFF and AMCU making inroads in the Rustenburg area. So potentially, again, a very, very explosive, kind of very volatile environment, and maybe there's been some political pressure on the PRC to say, listen, let's just normalise things. Let's give a little bit of breathing room for Lonmin. But in the end, I think it's healthy for any industry.
Yes, and it is a very difficult position that the parties find themselves in. You talk to Ben Magara, the chief executive of Lonmin, and he will tell us that shareholders have got absolutely no choice but to follow their rights. Otherwise, they will find themselves diluted beyond all compare. One last try with Henry Rousseau. 19th of November is D-Day. Is this a rights issue that gets supported?
I think in the end it will go through. That's just the mathematics of it. If you've got the ability to buy one share, the probability is probably that it would make sense. It all depends on the share price. We've seen the share price down at around 30-35% at one stage today. So already it was at one stage below 10p. As it approaches 1p, it might get to the point where shareholders say, why bother? Why buy another share if the share I've got shows little value?
Now, when one looks at it, was there going to be any consequence for the management of Lonmin, for the board of Lonmin, for the way in which this has panned out? Because it's been a disaster from an investment perspective from start to finish.
Yeah, yes, it has been. And I think some blame has to be put in front of the management of Lonmin. They certainly, I believe, haven't been responsive enough, early enough. They've really left this too late. But on the other hand, that they've also been unfortunate. We've seen the Volkswagen scandal put the platinum price under significant pressure. So it's been a combination of both, and I think it's probably a lesson to management that you've always got to act early. You've got to act decisively, and not push things to the wall and wait for the very last minute.
But sometimes it's not up to management. Sometimes management may see the writing on the wall and may choose to be proactive, but then you get the Department of Mineral Resources, which steps into the mix. And we've got a new mines minister, of course, all of 2 months' experience in the job. The timing couldn't be worse from that perspective, could it?
I think that the new mining minister, and I will pull the appointment of the new mining minister through to the Lonmin issue. I think at least in that sense, it's going to be the fallout of the Lonmin recapitalisation, something that the new minister will have to deal with, and also the fallout just of an industry in crisis mode. As I said, we're seeing the labour negotiations coming up next year, July. It's pretty clear that Lonmin doesn't have money to pay significant increases to workers, and so the same applies to the rest of the sector. So I think it's going to be tough for a new mining minister to find his feet, and he certainly has to work with the Minister of Labour, the Minister of Environmental Affairs, to make sure that the mining industry is again something that investors are willing to put their money in. And just the share price reaction of Lonmin is a clear signal that investors are not keen to put more money into the sector at the moment.
Andre Rousseau, thank you very much, the portfolio manager at Investec Asset Management. November the 19th is D-Day for that particular vote. The PIC is involved. There is a connection. The rights issue is underwritten by the biggest banks. They don't have a choice. They're owed hundreds of millions of rand. And as a result, they're going to want to keep this thing going for as long as possible in an effort to try to recoup those huge debts. Lonmin has got far too much debt. The platinum is expensive to reach. And then there is the political imperative on this one as well. Thank you for watching. There'll be more money makers or maybe even value destroyers tomorrow. But until then, good night and goodbye.